Hey everyone, grace to you and peace from God our Father and our Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ. My name is Tim Wright, one of the pastors here at Community Grace Lutheran Church, coming to you from Peoria, Arizona. Glad to have you worshiping with us today. As we start, I want to channel a little Forrest Gump for you. Change is like a baby's soiled diaper. It's going to happen, it's inevitable, it's messy, and it's stinky. But once you get through the change, it's a breath of fresh air. Now, last week, we began a new series on change. And starting particularly today for the next few weeks, we're going to look at this in-between time. I'll flesh that out more for you in just a few moments. We're going to talk about the in-between time of change. But what we saw last week is that the one thing that never changes is change. We're always going through change. Big changes, small changes, significant changes, insignificant changes. Changes we bring about ourselves, changes that happen to us, positive changes, negative changes. We're always going through change. And as we saw last week, we oftentimes think that change is a simple process of moving from A to B. But it's not like that. Every single change goes through a valley. And of course, the deeper the change, the longer we're in the valley. But we always go through loss into life. We go from death to resurrection. But even then, it's not quite that simple. Because in the in-between time, it looks a lot more like a Kyler Murray scramble. We find ourselves going backwards and forwards, and ups and downs, and circles and in squares, and we can spend a lot of time here in the loss, in the in-between time, depending again on how big the change is. And in all of this are a number of detours that are natural when it comes to change. They're okay unless we get stuck in them. And that's what we're going to focus on today, are some of those detours of change in the in-between time. And we're going to do that by looking at a story from the second book in the Bible, the book of Exodus. Now, it's there that we read that the people of Israel, for over 400 years, lived under the tyranny of the Egyptian Empire. For over 400 years, the Egyptians forced the people of Israel to work as their slaves. They were forced to do back-breaking labor every single day, day after day, without a break. The people of Israel had no power over their lives. They had no ability to make their own decisions. Their identity as individuals and as a people was shaped by slavery. But then, after 400 years, God intervened. And through a series of 10 power moves, God brought the Egyptian nation and the Egyptian gods to their knees. And God set the people of Israel free. Well, a few days after they had been set free from Egypt, the people of Israel found themselves standing in front of a wide, vast wilderness and desert. They had no food, they had no water, they had no place to stay, they didn't know where they were going, they didn't really know who they were anymore, and they weren't quite sure who this God was who had just rescued them. They were standing face to face with change, in particular that in-between time. And it forced them to ask new kinds of questions. Where are we going? Who are we now? What does it mean to be free? What does it look like to be free? And who is this God and where is this God who rescued us? Now, as far as God was concerned, God knew who the people of Israel were. They were God's chosen people. God chose them to love on them, to bless them, and to bless them so they could be a blessing to all of creation. But the people of Israel had to learn that for themselves, which meant they were going to have to go through a change experience that would transform them from slaves to the people of God. So in this in-between time, their worldview would be challenged. Their identity would be called into question. Even their understanding of God, which was pretty much shaped by their understanding of Egyptian gods back then, their understanding of God would go through a radical transformation. But for them, that in-between time would not be from A to B. It would be like that Kyler Murray scramble. They would be going all over the place for the next 40 years, backwards and forwards, up and down, as they went through that process of change. And during that time, they hit several detours. The first of those detours was insecurity and uncertainty. As they're standing there before this vast desert, they're asking the question, what now? As terrible as life was back in Egypt, at least they knew every night they'd have a place to sleep. At least they knew every day they would have food to eat and water to drink. But now they had nothing. And so the question is, what now? And as they're standing there looking at this vast wilderness, they're asking the question, and where is this God who rescued us just a few days earlier? What now? And that's the thing about change. It knocks us off our game. When we're in the midst of dramatic change, we lose all of our roadmaps. We lose our sense of identity. And sometimes we can even lose sense of the presence of God. It's a normal part of the change experience. But if we stay there, we end up being lost. Another detour they hit was turmoil. Shortly after the people of Israel had escaped from Egypt, the Egyptians had a change of heart. The Egyptians realized that they had just let all of that free slave labor go. And so they sent the Egyptian army to bring the people of Israel back. And so now the people of Israel, who have just been freed, who walked out in victory, are standing trapped between a sea and the Egyptian army. And they start to mumble and cry out to Moses, their leader. Why didn't you just leave us in Egypt to die? Why didn't you just leave us alone? It would be much better to be a slave in Egypt than be a corpse in the desert. Now, underneath those complaints is fear. They're just discombobulated. They have no idea what's going on. And change can do that to us. It can fill us with fear. It can fill us with anxiety, even anger because we've lost control. And again, sometimes in the midst of that turmoil, it's hard to see what God is up to. And so we have uncertainty, we have turmoil, and then we have loss. Again, even though conditions were bad, the people of Israel knew they had a place to sleep at night, they had food, they had water. But now they're standing in front of this desert. They've got an entire nation, and they're wondering, how in the world are we going to eat every day? Where are we going to sleep every night? Where's the water coming from? And when you go through change, you start to look back on the past through nostalgia. And that's what the Egyptians do. As bad as it was, they said to Moses, why didn't you just leave us in Egypt? Every day we sat around pots filled with meat and had all the bread we could want. Now that's probably not true. But when you can't see the future and when you've lost everything, the past can look pretty good. And we tend to view the past through rose-colored glasses. And what we want to make sure we do is that as we're moving through that lost stage, we're aware of all that we've lost, we grieve for it, but we keep our eyes open to what God is doing. Because that's where the story takes us. What the story tells us is that in the midst of the loss and the uncertainty and the turmoil, God did not abandon God's people. Because change doesn't have the final word, God's grace does. So when the people of Israel were trapped between the sea and the Egyptian army, God parted that sea, the people walked through on dry land, and then the sea engulfed itself over the Egyptian army. When the people had nothing to eat, God provided manna, this cake-like, bread-like substance that was on the dew of the ground every single morning for 40 years. And God provided food for them. God provided quail for them to eat, so they had some meat. God provided water. God proved that God is a God who will protect them, that God is a God who will provide for them. And God used that time to strip away their identity as slaves, to reclothe them in their new identity as the children of God. God did that in a variety of ways, but one of the ways that God did it was by giving them a Sabbath day, a day off. Slaves don't get days off. But they aren't slaves. They're not chattel. They're not property. They're God's children. And God gives them a day of rest every week. And so God showed up over and over again for the people of Israel. Now, they didn't always recognize it. They didn't always continue to follow God without grumbling. But God kept walking with them, meeting those detours and making sure they got through them. And God will do that for you as well. The psalmist says it this way: even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for you're with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. Now, it's a picture of a shepherd leading the sheep through that dangerous, perilous valley of the shadow of death, change. And the shepherd has two tools available. The one is the shepherd's stick or rod, and if the sheep are going this way, he'll tap them on the shoulder. If they go this way, tap them on the shoulder to keep them on the path, to keep them from being detoured. And if they do take a detour, the shepherd uses the crook to lift the sheep back up and put them onto the path, to get them through that valley to the banquet awaiting them. And that's God's promise to you today. The cross of Jesus, planted in the deepest moment of darkness and loss, stands as the promise to you that God will get you through change, that you will not go through it alone. All of us are going to go through change. Some of you are going to go through it more than others, and some of you are going through it right now. And so Jesus' promise to you today is that he is the same yesterday, today, and forever. And he says to you right now, even though you walk through the valley of the shadow of change, you don't need to be afraid. I've got you. Follow me.